So friends, once again, a very warm welcome this afternoon to our session, The Human Face of the Climate Emergency, a Call to Action. With that in mind, we are about to begin our discussion this afternoon focused around the climate emergency that faces us, and it's particularly pertinent that we do this in the season of creation, a time when we are invited to pause, to stop, to reflect on that particular theme. And that is why I'm delighted to be able to host today's session. My name is Callum Timms, and I am a member of the Archdiocese of St Andrews in Edinburgh's Commission for Caritas, Justice and Peace. And it's my privilege to lead on some of the communications work of our commission, trying to make sure that these incredibly important issues reach our parishes and, most importantly, are heard by parishioners across our diocese. I'm delighted to welcome today two very pertinent, two very acute and excellent speakers on this topic, both members of the Diocese Commission. First of all, Agatha Kaikai, who is a trustee of the Refugee Survival Trust, whose mission is to minimise destitution among refugees and asylum seekers in Scotland. She's a member of the Justice and Peace group at St Columba's Parish in Edinburgh, and represents the parish in the Newington Churches Together Committee. And Mike Miniter, Dr. Mike Miniter, who is a parishioner at St Catherine's in Gracemount and has been active in justice and peace for several or many years. He now mainly focuses on groups that have an active wish to seek ecological justice, working for a just future for all in Palestine and Israel, and campaigning for morally responsible investment. He's a member of the Iona community and works as the computing expert in a climate research group at the University of Edinburgh. Today, we're invited to listen to the cry of the earth. This is something which has been emphasised throughout the papacy of Pope Francis and, of course, the cry of the poor. And I've already said that we do this in the season of creation, which is particularly special this year, as we prepare to welcome world leaders to Scotland ahead of COP26, which will take place in Glasgow. And so with that in mind, I'd like to hand over now to Anthony Kremers, who will open our session in prayer. Anthony.
Thank you, Callum. So in our prayer today, there will be some images, some words, and some silence and some music. We begin with some words of Pope Francis. I think here of God speaking through the prophet Isaiah, with some words updated. Come, let us talk this over. If you are ready to listen, we can still have a great future. But if you refuse to listen and to act, you will be devoured by the heat and the pollution, by droughts here and by rising waters there.
Lord Jesus, our sister Mother Earth, cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ Jesus, we have come to see ourselves as the lords and masters of our sister Mother Earth, entitled to plunder her at will. Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Lord Jesus, we have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of Mother Earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy. Don't be afraid. My love is stronger. My love is stronger than your fear. Don't be afraid. My love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near. Don't be afraid. My love is stronger. My love is stronger than your fear. Don't be afraid. My love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near.
The sailors took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they again took soundings and found 15 fathoms.
Fearing that we would run aground on a rocky coast, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come.
The natives showed us extraordinary hospitality.
They lit a fire and welcomed all of us because it had begun to rain and was cold.
Cry out with joy to God, all of the earth. Cry out with joy to God, all the earth. Cry out with joy to God, all of the earth. Cry out with joy to God, all the earth. Cry out with joy to God, all of the earth. Cry out with joy to God, all the earth.
Well, thank you very much to Anthony, to Angela, to Kath and John for leading us in prayer. We now come to our first input, and I'd like to invite Mike Miniter, who's going to speak to us on the climate science, on what is driving people to become refugees in this difficult circumstance. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Callum. The plan is that I'll talk to you for about 40 minutes. Then we'll have a 5-minute exchange using the Zoom chat, and then an interval, and then we'll hear from Agatha. And then after Agatha has spoken, we'll have breakout groups for us to further discuss what we've heard during the afternoon. So I'll share and get underway. So, Callum, I'm assuming that you're seeing my presentation.
We can see your screen. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much. Anthony has opened the afternoon beautifully, and I also wish to just offer a couple of thoughts before we move forward, because we're going to be dealing in some quite oppressive facts, looking at the climate science and how people become refugees. So I wanted to re-emphasize something which was so strong in what Anthony said, but I do want us to try to speak about these things against this background of Pope Francis renewing the call for us to see the earth as gift. So that when we come on to looking at the challenges that we're being faced with, we see them against this context of the earth as a gift of love and grace. And so we'll be hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And in a recent document, as an introduction to pastoral orientations on climate displaced people, Pope Francis said, to see or not to see, that is the question. So that these difficulties we're going to see almost as silhouettes against the earth, against this gift that we are given to share. And what I'm going to do is to give a short introduction to the climate science, and then we'll hear from some climate refugees in some videos from different places, and then look at the causes of their lives becoming unsustainable and the role of the climate in that. And then come on to look at the calls to action and the signs of the Spirit that are present already as people respond. So let's look at some climate basics. Why is the equator hotter than the poles? The fact that it is gives rise to there being ocean and atmospheric currents that carry heat from the equator northwards and southwards. And the temperature difference between the equatorial and polar regions is the driver. And the fact that the Earth spins makes huge difference to what those currents looks like. So really the Earth is the most astonishingly poised and beautifully balanced planet, because its spin makes life possible. It gives us obviously day and night, but it does so much to give rise to the currents that we see. And the we'll see that the atmosphere gives us a temperature which is comfortable for us. And all of these things are so sort of perfectly balanced, that we have a remarkable planet, as we get to know other planets around that look much more like the moon. Well, let's come back to my question. Why is the equator hotter than the poles? And the answer is that if you imagine standing on the Earth and you go out in the midsummer day when the sun is as high as it gets, the sun feels stronger than it does in the evening. And so the more overhead the sun is, the stronger is the light. And you see that with the curvature of the Earth, an amount of light that shines just in this small area. Can you see my, Callum, can you see my pointer move, please?
Yes, we can, Mike.
Thank you. Good. The amount of light that falls on this small area of the Earth near the equator falls over a much larger area near the poles, so that the poles are inherently made cooler than the equator. So one more question. When the sun shines on the Earth all the time, I know it's sometimes on the day side and sometimes it's different side points that are directed towards the Earth. But why hasn't the sun made the Earth too hot for life, when it's receiving energy all the time? And the answer is that the Earth also radiates. And so that sunlight, which is absorbed by the Earth, by the atmosphere, or by the land or sea, is ultimately also balanced by radiation from the Earth, from the surface, from the land and atmosphere especially. So that the outgoing radiation on average balances the incoming sunlight in terms of the amount of energy received. This is an infrared image from the BBC Planet Earth 2 series, I think it is. And so that what it's showing is that a leopard emits infrared radiation, and so do the rocks and trees around it. So that in the same way that these things emit infrared, so does the Earth itself. So that anything which is not at what they call absolute zero emits radiation, and the Earth is Earth emits infrared radiation, and that infrared radiation is the thing which stops us from becoming hotter and hotter. Now, the infrared radiation is absorbed in the atmosphere by things called greenhouse gases. And there's a video I'd like to play which rehearses some of what I've said and speaks about the greenhouse gases.
The moon. In shadow, its surface temperature drops to minus 150 degrees Celsius. In sunlight, it rises to over 100. Virtually at the same distance from the sun, temperatures on Earth are much less extreme, and we owe this life-giving fact to its atmosphere, in particular to the presence of the so-called greenhouse gases. Energy from the sun reaches us in the middle bands of the electromagnetic spectrum as light and heat. To balance this daily income from the sun, Earth radiates energy back, but only in the longer wavelengths of the infrared. but it doesn't all escape back into space. Some of it is absorbed in the lower atmosphere, mainly by water vapor, but also by carbon dioxide. Throughout the long period of man's rise to civilization, this blanket of heat-absorbing gases has kept the average global temperature around 15 degrees Celsius, against the moon's -20. But in the last 150 years, this balance has been altered. Burn any organic matter, and its content of carbon combines with oxygen. Burning a cubic meter of natural gas produces roughly 2 kilograms of carbon dioxide. A liter of gasoline, 2.5 kilos. Burn a ton of coal, and you release up to 4 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Since 1850, the consumption of these fossil fuels has increased 100-fold. Add to this the more recent burning of the tropical forests, and the result has been a marked and accelerating increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What's more?
Okay, there's a little bit more of this I'd like to show you. This film begins with them starting to plot globally averaged atmospheric surface temperatures. Let me say that again, it's a temperature that we would measure if we step outside, but averaged around the world. So that they're picking this up from somewhere around, what would it be, 1850, which is important because that's typically used as the start of, as the sort of baseline, the base of the pre-industrial period. So that 1850 to 1900 is considered before the climate could have changed from what humans have done in the industrialization, through industrialization. So that what they're doing here is plotting the observed globally average temperatures derived from many observations, and we'll see what they say about them.
Averages, it shows a rise of just 0.5 degrees Celsius. This could be due to some natural climatic change, but it does accord with computer models based on the known atmospheric processes and predicted buildup of the greenhouse gases. These models contain many uncertainties, but they forecast that by 2050, global mean temperature could have increased by at least 1.5 degrees, possibly near 4.
Snow melt there.
This may not sound much, but what the computer modelers are looking at is the possibility of change at a rate faster than at any time since the end of the Ice Age.
I think particularly over the ocean here, over the North Pacific.
Change too fast, perhaps, for life to adapt without severe dislocation.
These mid-latitude regions in the southern hemisphere.
What they foresee is not a steady and even warming overall, but alterations to the familiar patterns of climate and the increasing frequency of abnormal weather. No two.
Okay, so in that film we saw and heard a number of the themes that we'll be returning to, to do with regional change and the role of the greenhouse gases, and also the use of observations and models. What I want to do is just look at how we make observations from which we can do climate science. So that there's a number of ways of doing observations. The map on the left shows the weather stations in the Edinburgh and Northumberland areas. In fact, in our Archdiocese and Northumberland. And then the balloon isn't a party trick for someone. It's being launched from Antarctica with a little payload on it, which measures temperatures at different elevations and maybe measures other things as well, humidity maybe. And, so that balloons are used to take instruments into the atmosphere for measurements. There's been a huge amount of work done by digitizing and making useful for computers measurements taken by sailors over many decades, before climate science was developed. But when they were seeking to understand or seeking just to measure the ocean for navigation purposes, I imagine. The bottom picture is from our Scottish Alliance for Marine Science, which is near Oban, and it shows a drone. This is a beautiful piece of machinery. They launch it from a ship, and typically maybe in an area where the ocean currents are quite strong, and it self-propels itself and dives down to different depths and then comes back up to the surface and dives again, comes back up to the surface, and then radios home with all the measurements it's got. And it's just one of the new instruments that's being used to get observations so that we're monitoring the climate in ways which are far, far beyond that which was envisaged even 50 years ago. And one of those ways which is so important is using satellites. So that this is a satellite data set from around September, showing the infrared radiation that's leaving the Earth at that particular time, so that you can see that the dark red are the areas emitting most infrared radiation, and they're quite close to the equator, but with that fairly white band going across from the Pacific through into Africa. And the reason why that's there is there's not much infrared being emitted here, not much reaching the satellite, because this is cloud. The cloud does two things. It reflects the incoming sunlight, but more importantly here, it absorbs the infrared radiation that would have come to it, would have come out from lower in the atmosphere or from the land itself. So that we have the satellite and these various ways of taking measurements. One of the things that you do in science is do experiments. And you can argue that humankind is doing an experiment, but it's only one experiment with the Earth, and it's not that repeatable, and experiments shouldn't be destructive. So that leaves us needing to resort to computers as our other main tools. We have the observations and we can use computers. Richardson, around 1920, was imagining that it would be possible to forecast the weather. This predates electronic computers, so that he imagined something of the size of the Albert Hall with banks of people. These people were the computers doing calculations, and maybe each of them taking a little area of the Earth and doing a calculation for that area. And then, so that different people take different grid cells, is the word that we'd use. So different computers calculate different grid cells under the coordination of this person standing in the middle. So this was an entirely fanciful, an entire flight of fancy. But it was at the time when the notion of doing calculations about the climate and about weather were starting to develop. And now climate science is one of the users of the most powerful computers climate science uses the most powerful computers in the world. This one shown here is an example of a machine created by Hewlett-Packard Cray, and it's a machine that looks like that, which is being installed for use in UK science and 4 of these cabinets are currently in use, and they're more powerful than the most powerful computer that we had in Britain until a year ago. And there's going to be 23 of those cabinets. Those numbers may not excite anyone except any of the geeks who happen to be in the audience. And we can have a chat sometime if you want to know more about the geekiness and the use of computers. But as a matter of interest, these things would be about 8 feet high, I would imagine. So when we're using climate models, now we use something like 10,000 maybe CPUs. That's the power of probably, I don't know, the 1,200 or 1,500 high-end PCs all working together. And there are 3 rough classes of models that people use on computers like that. One is called global circulation, where it looks at how the fluids of atmosphere and ocean behave on a rotating sphere, the Earth, receiving radiation. And then the next ones are used for both weather forecasting and the climate system. And so that the weather forecasts we get come from that kind of a model. And then the most complicated in terms of representing land and sea ice and ice sheets and oceans and so on. These are termed Earth system models. I'm going to be coming out from this mode very quickly. So if you're losing the will to live, hang with it, because we're not going to be doing this kind of computer talk for more than about 2 more minutes, if that. But what I did want to indicate was that in these models, there's an awful lot of physical processes being built into them. You know, you've got the ocean behavior, you've got atmospheric, you've got radiation. Each of these arrows represents a different process, which would be represented mathematically within the climate model. The way that these things are constructed, you saw before this notion of laying a grid over the Earth or over the region that you're modeling. And for each of those grid cells, you imagine the atmosphere above it divided into different layers. And then for each of those grid cells in the ocean, you imagine a column divided into cells as well, going down into the ocean. And there are calculations done for each of these cells. But I'm not saying more about that unless someone really wants me to and asks questions later. The observation that really matters and also extends that which we saw in the shell video earlier. It comes from Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And what it's showing on the left here is the parts per million, the concentration of carbon dioxide measured in the atmosphere. And then you have the year here. So we know at pre-industrial times, sort of 1850-ish, there were about 278 parts per million, and that's now getting close to double. Isn't a little bit away from doubling yet, but it's an unremitting rise. And if we then look at the more recent results from the climate models, I'd ask you to focus just on this right-hand one, because I don't want to spend too long on this, but I want to spend long enough. What this is showing is the extension of the plots from the shell video when it talked about it seeing, I think it was 0.5 degree, a little bit more warming, and projecting that there would be more by the year 2020 where we are. And you can see that this black line is the observations, what we've actually measured for globally average temperature. And In order to reproduce that, we can use the climate models. If we run the models without the extra greenhouse gases, then you get no significant increase at all. You don't get increase, you just get it. The models stay around no change. And that's taking into account solar and volcanic, what they call forcings, changes in the intensity of the radiation received by the Earth due to orbit, changes in the intensity of the radiation reaching the land, which can be blocked by volcanic emissions. So a big volcano can have a cooling effect on the Earth's climate. So with only natural forcings, you can't replicate the black line, which is the observations. To do that, you have to include greenhouse gases, what they call the human forcings. Okay, so that's what we've got here is we have to include greenhouse gases to understand what we are observing at the moment. And then the models that replicate the history can then be used to project forward and say what's likely to happen, which is where we're still talking about struggling to reach, to hold to 1.5 degrees global warming, and much more than that being possible. I'll speak a bit more about the IPCC later, but those of you who are struggled with the science, or my explanation of it, you can relax. Well, you can relax in terms of not having struggled with the science, but maybe from the frying pan into the fire, as it were, because we're going to hear about climate refugees from a number of places. And what I'm going to be extracting from these videos is the fact that in the cases we're hearing, it's disruption of the climate, which is having impacts, which causes people to become refugees. But this article from The Guardian, I wanted to show because it shows the scale of the impact of climate. So 30 million new displacements due to floods, storms, or wildfires. Far more than due to war, even. The term climate refugees isn't well defined. When people talk about how people will be driven from their homes by climate refugees, but the 1951 Convention on Refugees doesn't speak about climate change, so that they don't have a place in international law formally, although international human rights protect everyone. So I wanted to include that because I felt it's important to have a notion of what we're talking about with climate refugees. The other definition I meant to give, which I imagine you've picked up by now, is when we're talking about the climate, we're talking about trends and prevailing behaviors. So it's like averaged weather. But let's move on and hear from Bangladesh.
আমাকে বয়স আমরা দেখিনি যে এরকম ঝড় হতে আর এরকম পানি বৃদ্ধি হতে।
আমপানের সময় আমপানের একটা জাল বানিয়েছিলাম, আসার অবস্থা দেখছি টিন টিন নাই, সব উড়ে খালে পড়ে গেছে, চাল টাল কিচ্ছু নাই।
আবার নতুন করে সব তৈরি করতে হয়েছে। 2 বছর কাগজ দিয়ে কাগজ টাঙাই। আমি আবার একটু জায়গা চাই নিছি। পানি আগে দেখেছি 2 হাত আর এখন দেখতে 4 হাত, এতে অবদা থাকবে কিভাবে? থাকবে না তো। লবণ পানি এত উঁচু না, নদীতে মাছ ছিল।
মনে করেন আমার কাজ হলো এই নদীতে মাছ ধরা কাজ, এবার সেবার আবার আমার তো নেই কিছু সেরকম, বাচ্চাদের তো রেখে যাব, আমার থাকলে কি আমি এইখানে বসত করতাম?
আর ওই নদীর পানিতে গোসল দেবো, নোনা পানি, তাতে গোসল দেবো। পোড়া গা জ্বালা করে, চোখ জ্বালা করে, চোখের সমস্যা হয়। সবসময় মনে করা যায় যে এরা হলো এইখান থেকে লোক একটু নদীর ওই পারে যাবো, এই নজর ভর যাই ওইখান থেকে কল চেপি পানির লোক হয় করে নি বাসায় নিতে খাবো। এর ফলে কোনো নির্দেশ নেই, ছেলেপিলি নিয়ে থাকতে গেলে ভয় করে এর ভিতরে।
বাতাস হলে ভয় করে, ঝড় উঠবে ভয় করে, কোথায় যাবো এই জন্য ভয় করে, কনেকে থাকবো।
আর এখন কোনোটা পানিটা আটকাই রাখার জন্য ভেড়িবাতটা ভালো নেই, তাহলে ভাঙবে না। আর এই যে ভেড়িবাত দিয়ে গেছে, এ কিন্তু আবার ঝড়া হলে পর আবার ভেঙে যাবে।
কেন তো মাটি কোনো সমতল হয়নি, তারপরে আবার ভাঙতে হতো। হাল ঘুরিয়ে যাইতেছে, সমস্ত জিনিস সব পাল্টেই যাইতেছে। সেরকম নেই যে আমি ওইখানে যাব। আমরা দ্বীপের মধ্যখানে ভাসছি টোকা ছেলার মতো। বুদ্ধি কম করবেন, বিপদে কম পড়বেন, ফন্দেও কম পড়বেন। যত বাঙালিরা মাথায় বুদ্ধি দরকার তত বিপদ জড়াবে।
One of the things that science has to do is to sort of objectify or turn things into numbers and concepts. And when you hear a video like that, I find it very hard to lose the human dimension by going into these abstracts, but we need to. So that what we've seen is sea level rise and intense frequent storms, leading to floods, to loss of crops, damage to homes, damage to health, loss of drinking water, impact on fisheries. So all of these things have been the impacts that have arisen because the climate was disrupted by these. We'll have one more from Guatemala.
On this dusty hillside in Guatemala's western highlands, Francisco Leon Soc prepares a field for planting. A decade ago, he could grow enough corn to feed his family for most of the year, but these days, his harvests are getting smaller and smaller. Francisco says climate change is to blame.
The weather shouldn't be like this. It used to rain in the middle of April, but now the rain doesn't arrive until the end of May or the beginning of June. We always wait until it's rained before we plant our corn. If it doesn't rain, we don't plant because the seeds won't grow.
Average daytime temperatures in Guatemala have risen over the past decade, while crop-damaging frosts are more common. And when it does rain, it often pours for days, washing the topsoil away. Guatemala already has the highest rate of child malnutrition in the Western Hemisphere, and in the Western Highlands, indigenous subsistence farmers make up half the population. When crops here fail, people leave. Julio Leon Kak wants to follow his uncles to the United States. The 18-year-old says that there's no future for young people in his village. The only people he sees getting ahead have left to work abroad and send money back.
I want to make something out of my life, to be able to follow my dreams. I want to get a good education, find a job, and help my family. Here it's a struggle to save even a tiny bit of money.
As Guatemala's dry corridor continues to expand, more farming families are set to struggle. Guatemala is one of the 10 countries in the world most impacted by climate change. And while people leave the country for many different reasons, at the root you will often find climate change. That makes adapting to and mitigating the changing weather patterns a priority. Marcos.
So here we've got drought and again intense and frequent storms with some of these same impacts, but with malnutrition, poverty, and lands turning to desert.
Since 2005, actually, I started to witness some kind of weather changing. Like every year it gets like hotter and hotter. The desert part in Syria, the east, they also get more affected. The water supply is getting less and less. Prices increase. The wheat, the price go higher and higher. People like frustrated, very angry about the prices. They think it was like the government's intent to make the prices go higher.
No one wants to go around saying that, rising sea levels or droughts are going to cause wars, but as a contributing factor to wars, yes. In very simple terms, in the years preceding 2011, which was the year of the Arab uprisings, there'd been terrible drought conditions in North Africa and the Levant, and this had particularly hit the Syrians very badly.
The people who were growing crops out in the deserts areas had to leave, couldn't grow them. They moved to the metropolises, one in particular, Aleppo.
There are also recent reports from Syria and Iraq speaking again about rising temperatures, record low levels of rainfall and drought. And that's leading to a loss of electricity as well because the dams aren't working, and that impacts on infrastructure and health facilities. Again, this plot showing the climate disruption causing certain impacts. If we pull all this together with some of the things we've not had a time to talk about, I'll just mention two of them. Unreliable seasons, people don't know when to plant their crops. So that in this box, we've got the climate disruption happening at both regional and global scales, and these causing these impacts in the higher box on people's lives. There are feedbacks we don't have time to talk about, in particular in the polar areas. And one of the things that I wanted just to mention in passing, I've highlighted in red, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. The crucial point, all of this climate disruption arises from human-caused emissions of greenhouse gases. The IPCC have tested the other possibilities. They do not explain disruption being observed. It's us putting greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide especially, into the atmosphere, and then with feedbacks, which include methane going into the atmosphere in the polar areas. Pollution and land misuse are hugely important, and the biodiversity issues have their own conference of the parties in China this month, so that these need to be not forgotten, but aren't going to be included in this talk in the time I've got left. The climate scientists do what's called attribution studies, which assess the likelihood of an event with and without human-induced climate change. This website gives loads of case studies. The IPCC report is a phenomenal piece of work. 3,976 pages from all of this huge number of authors has collated the science of the last years and found that these are the impacts which are going to happen, are being observed, excuse me. So carbon dioxide, highest in it's been for 2 million years, sea ice lowest, glaciers retreating, and glaciers are the water source for so many people. And so these are consequences that we've been meeting. I haven't talked much about fire, but that excessive dryness leads to dryness in the soil, leads to fire risk. And we've seen that. And we had the heat domes in the Western United States and the fires there. And researchers there were saying these things could not have happened without greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the models show that the impacts increase quickly as global warming takes hold, so that as you move from global average of 1.5 to 4, the impacts are much stronger. And every region is projected to experience increasing changes in the things that cause these impacts, and multiple ones in each region at any time. The paraphrase of a lot of the IPCC report is the sooner and further that emissions are reduced, the better, but also that low likelihood outcomes such as the Gulf Stream closing perhaps, disruptions such as that can't be ruled out. And the climate we experience in the future depends on our decisions now. So that's coming from the science. Coming from Pope Francis, oh Lordy, I was running out of time. So that human life and the things that we do, things we need, the red circle is the bounds of our concern. So we assume the climate, the earth resources, the water and nature are there for our exploitation. We throw pollution out without regard to where it goes. And we need to move from this worldview to this one. And changing worldviews is something the church should be good at and is already becoming active in, so that we're seeing integral ecology with things like the air, the climate, the resources, the soil, ecosystems, biodiversity, all part of this integral ecology affected by how we live. And this is the, what's the word? A call for us to have a richer, more beautiful life. So to come back to this image of having looked at the having looked at the crises, knowing that the earth is this unique gift, Pope Francis joins the IPCC, and indeed he responds to the science, saying that we have to work together. These cries are increasingly being heard. They're being heard in many ways by the churches. We have the Care of Creation Office set up by the Justice and Peace Scotland excuse me, that's not quite precise, by the Bishops' Conference. We have the Laudato Si movement worldwide with its animators course for people to go and learn about what I've skated over and much more besides. We have the beautiful cluster eco circles, people coming together to know they can't respond to all this individually. They need to do it with mutual support. So many other things. And I would like, oh heavens, yes, our commission has a working group, of which I'm a member, and that working group seeks to help the commission in raising awareness of Laudato Si and poverty and refugees, and indeed the justice to do with Israel, Palestine, and I've forgotten one, I'm sorry, in the Archdiocese. Please join them, so that these are all signs that the cries are being heard. And I'd invite you in chat to enter the signs of hope that you see. And I've overshot a few minutes. Sorry, Callum. If anyone wants to see slides or resources, then that's my email address.
Thank you very much, Mike, for sharing that with us. Thank you for giving us an insight into the science today, and for using your own expertise to help us to do so. But I have to say, I was particularly struck by the statistic at the end of the video that you shared from Bangladesh. I was struck by that whole video in particular, but at the end of it, it came on screen that 41 people every minute were displaced as a result of climate events. And I have to say that really struck me and put into context, as you say, Mike, the people behind the numbers that objective science refers to. There are some great suggestions coming in. The working group, as a sign of hope, the diocesan working group, many local green spaces being developed, eco-congregations and so on. But perhaps, Mike, we have time just for one question to put to you, and that is, we're being asked for more information, or what is the Care for Creation office in the Bishops' Conference? And I wondered if you might say a little bit about that, and then we will take a short break.
It's in the process of being set up, is my understanding. Actually, I see that Danny is on the call, and he can put in the chat any correction to what I'm about to say. So that Father McGuinness heads it, and it's going to be helping the parishes to respond to moving to a low carbon future. Danny, I do invite you to put the chat to say any more than that, because I'm just starting to get to know about it myself.
Mike, thank you very much once again. I'd invite everybody just to pause for a few moments, just to let everything that we've heard there digest, and there'll be a silent video that's going to come on your screen at the moment. I'd invite you just to spend a couple of moments to watch that, to top up your mug, if you like, and we'll come back together at 4:10 to hear from Agatha. So at just over 5 minutes, we'll come back together at 10 past to hear from Agatha. While you're away, you're welcome to stop sharing your video if you wish. And perhaps over the break, while the video is playing, you could share in the chat who you are and where you're joining us from today. It would be great to know where everyone's joining us from. So thanks very much, and I'll let Mike begin our video.
Just take me a minute to find it, Callum. While I'm looking for it, I could say that these are slides that come from the garden of the Holy Cross parish, who had a Laudato Si rosary a few weeks ago, and I just thought it was stunningly beautiful. So I asked them for permission to use their slides today for this intermission, so that people who are staying at the computer have something to look at. And So as soon as I can get my computer back in order, I will show you. Here we go. Very nearly. Sorry. You can start on the break and anyway, and come back. It'll be showing in a few seconds, just a few seconds. You seeing that yet, Callum?
That's perfect. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. Well, friends, thank you very much once again for joining us, and it's great to see you sharing where you're from and where you're joining us from in the chat with us today. So thank you very much for doing that. It's great to see people from across our diocese and perhaps even further afield with us today. We've got a few questions there about the Care for Creation Office and about eco-congregations and the number of parishes. Perhaps we'll have time to pick up on them later on. But for now, what I'd like to do is pass over to Agatha Kaikai so that we can hear about the current situation facing refugees and what's in place here in Scotland. Agatha, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Colum and Callum, and welcome everyone. I feel a great responsibility to talk about the asylum process and refugees in Scotland, because this is a problem that is our doorsteps and the challenges we meet every day. And these issues will not go away. It will just seem to intensify over coming years. I will talk hopefully for the first 20 minutes, then which will give me time to review the asylum process and refugee system generally in the UK. Then I will ask my colleague Parisa Barameka from the Refugee Survivor Trust to give you a short overview of what it means to be a refugee and her lived experience in Scotland. International law demands protection of the human rights of asylum seekers and refugees in any country wherever they are. In Scotland, the implementation and practical aspects of this law can be understood at two levels. Firstly, at the local level, we look at the attitude of the Scottish Parliament, the local communities that create a welcoming and hospitable environment. At the other level, we look at the UK government, whose regulations offer services to the refugees. Often these two processes may be in opposition to each other. The reason why I say that is because the charities in Scotland has a lot of beautiful, hardworking, committed, and really inspiring people working to make the life of asylum seekers and refugees comfortable and to allow them to integrate into society. But our work is often hindered by the regulations from the Home Office. I will attempt to take you through gently and hopefully calmly through the asylum process, highlighting the main issues that are concerned, the difficulties that asylum seekers face, how charities in Scotland try to help them, and maybe how you can help us. So I will start sharing my slide. Slide up. So I'm just trying to go to the PowerPoint slideshow. Yeah. As a summary, took me long to go through that. If I just Callum, I'm not getting this through. My animation doesn't seem to be working.
So if you click your screen, we should see what comes up next.
Click my screen, yeah. Okay, yes. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So as a summary, I will talk about the asylum which is a human rights issue. And we'll give a brief description of the historical development of the human rights. First, it started in 1948, pre-World War II and during World War II, when Jews were being persecuted by the Nazi regime. And that brought about Universal Declaration of Human Rights to protect persecuted people. Then in 1951, the Refugee Convention expanded that political protection for the legal protection of all refugees, including in the clause additional factors that are issues of persecution. The law was further refined in 1964 and in 1998, which is known as the Protocol, and integrated in the UK immigration law for the protection of refugees. This year is the 70th anniversary of the 1951 Convention for Refugees. But even then, the status and human rights of refugees is very insecure. Several research reports in the UK have shown, for example, the report from the Human Rights and Equality Commission in England have shown that asylum seekers, refugees are the most disadvantaged and deprived group in the British population. I will show the flow chart of the asylum process, then discuss the new Scots refugee integration strategy, which was introduced by Holyrood in 2018, a strategy for welcoming into Scotland so that asylum seekers and refugees can integrate easily. I will discuss the present UK immigration laws, which is basically a prevention strategy of the UK government of asylum seekers entering Britain. And those laws endanger lives. The strategy that they have, there is the interception of boats on the Mediterranean Sea and returning them to countries offshore like Libya, offshore and transit processing centers and detention centers, the pushback policy to France on the English Channel, which has been very much in the news recently, and the new immigration plan that is preventing entry and the comments of high-profile refugee organizations and challenging the Home Office's plan. I will talk briefly about organizations that bridge the gap when the immigration policies fail by supporting asylum seekers and refugees. For example, my own organization, the Refugee Survivor Trust, our work in preventing destitution. This is the historic picture of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and often I look at it and say, can I identify any British MP? Sometimes I look at that and say, oh, he looks like Harold Wilson, but I don't think that's him. So the Refugee Convention and its protocol is the key document that formed the basis of rights of refugees. This was signed by 149 states. The Convention defines the term refugee, outlines the rights and the legal obligations of states to protect them. The core principle in these documents is the non-refoulement principle, which reads that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. The non-refoulement is now a rule in international law. Yet, the new immigration plan, which was published in March this year, includes the refoulement law. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees is the guardian of the 1951 Convention and its 1967 protocol in ensuring that the rights of refugees are respected and protected. Oh gosh, I've exited that. What's happening? Sorry about that. Yeah. This flow chart shows the complexity of the refugee system. I can't. Trying to have a bigger view of this slide. So just to talk you through quite gently, someone enters the UK, they claim asylum. They can only claim asylum in offices in London or Liverpool. So if they come to Glasgow, they would have to travel to these places to claim asylum. They come, they are penniless, they have no money to travel, and they would need to turn to the charities like the Refugee Survivor Trust, RST, to pay their way to London or Liverpool after they have made series of phone calls aided by the charities like RST to make an appointment. Some of them come, they have language barriers and they are needing a lot of support. They are intimidated by a new environment. They feel insecure and full of fear. But thankfully, there are many charities in Scotland, especially in Glasgow, that come to their aid. As an asylum seeker, they go for screening interview in London or Liverpool. The time, I'm using approximated times, say 4 months. It can be shorter or longer. When they are screened, then they go through various boxes. Unaccompanied children, minors, are sent directed to social services. those that are whose because of various factors, they do not seem to be genuine asylum seekers are detained. And they are detained in these detention centers. In Scotland, the notorious one is Dungay House Removal Center. There they are kept. Conditions are not so hospitable. In fact, some research have gone on, and there have been reports that the detention centers should be closed, but many of them are still open. And during COVID, there was an increased suffering in the detention centers. In the detention centers, some of them can be forcibly removed out of the country. The group in admissibility rule, again, the screening officer would doubt the validity of the story of the asylum seeker. There are others that their nationality issues is questioned because according to international law, asylum seekers can enter a country without legal papers, because when you are running away, fear of your life from a particular country, the very country you are fearing for, you're not going to stand around to apply for legal documents. So people can run away without that, and international law allows that, but these people are still considered inadmissible and their nationality issues are questioned. Those that are allowed to continue to make application for the asylum system, it can take approximately another maybe 6 months or more. They have an asylum interview. The decision takes another several months, and the decision is made. Very low percent. I have not included the percentage of positive decisions and negative decisions because it varies so much, and I didn't have really a reliable source to validate that. And especially someone with me without a legal background, I have to be careful the information, how I process information from the internet. However, when the asylum decision is made, for the few percent that have a positive decision, they claim refugee status. But the majority have a negative decision, and they have to go back and start the agonizing journey of application, reapplication, and this occurs in several stages. It can take a long time, several years. I know people in Glasgow who've been in that process for almost 10 years. It's unbelievable. Why all this is going on? How would the asylum seeker, do they live? Because if you go down this route, being detained, or you are fed in the detention homes. But if you are in the inadmissibility group, and if you are waiting to have an interview, or if you are, of course, God help you, if you are in the negative decision group, you don't have any right to services. You do not have any right to even medical care. If you have children, they may be allowed in school, but support services are reduced. So how do you survive? And this is how the charities in Glasgow come in to bridge the gap to support these people. Our organization, RST, for example, support to prevent the destitution among the refugees. After a lot of agonizing meetings with political leaders and hardworking people in Glasgow, in 2018, Holyrood came up with a new Scots refugee integration strategy, which is aimed that the asylum seekers and refugees live in safe, welcoming, and cohesive communities to build their life in diverse relationships and connections. That asylum seekers and refugees understand their rights, responsibilities, and entitlements that are able to exercise them to pursue full and independent lives. That asylum seekers and refugees are able to access well-coordinated services which recognize and meet their rights and needs. The policy involves strategic planning and legislation which have an impact on asylum seekers and refugees based on their rights, their needs, and aspirations. So in essence, the new Scots refugee integration strategy is welcoming the and realizing the human rights of refugees and trying to do what is right as demanded by international law to respect the rights and protect the rights of asylum seekers. But as I said in my introduction talk, for this to be practical, the authority comes from the Home Office. And the authority comes via the previous slide I showed, which shows the various pathways that asylum seekers can take. So this is just a flow diagram to show the themes and the various services involved in the new Scots refugee integration strategy, which is it recognizes the needs of asylum seekers. Now, the story I am talking about first, just to clarify, because when we talk of asylum seekers, at the moment there are two groups in Scotland. There is the planned asylum seekers and refugees, which are those that come under the European, the EU, and negotiation like the Syrians, and they already get refugee status before they are allowed in the country. So they come into, by planned refugee system, their needs are provided for, they are the responsibility of the government. But the unplanned asylum seekers that come, some from Syria, Afghanistan, and other countries, they do not come through that pathway. And these are the ones I'm talking about because they are the disadvantaged and the people that don't belong to anyone. And so the charities have to cater for their needs. And this new Scots refugee integration strategy, it seems to be one question I always ask myself, who is it referring to? In all goodness, we're referring to everyone, but at the moment, it just seems to be working well for the planned asylum seekers rather than for the whole group of asylum seekers. However, these services are offered, employability and welfare rights, housing, education, language, health and well-being, community and social connections. Now, the current immigration rules, the present government is really emphasizing. Some of these rules have been operating for quite several years. And its main purpose is to prevent entry into the UK. And several strategies are used: the interception at the Mediterranean Sea and returning to Libya. And this picture shows here NGOs opposing offshore asylum centers because the UK border force patrols the seas in the Mediterranean and sort of to send boats back to intercept and send. They're offshore and transition processing centers so that asylum seekers can be processed in other countries before they are allowed, where they are not allowed because they are processed there and then sent to detention centers or sent back to wherever their origin is. And these centers have been set right through the Mediterranean route, stretching from Europe to North Africa and Asia, which is the pathway that asylum seekers get into Britain. Thankfully, there are a lot of charities, especially the MSF, the Medicines Sans Frontieres, who have their own boats. They search and rescue asylum seekers. And they have said in their reports, they say they do it as a duty to prevent drowning. And that it doesn't matter where people come from, that people are sea humans. And I find their report very touching indeed. The pushback has been in the news all last week. So, and these reports, I'm quoting directly from the media reports. It's really, the media has really hit hard about this pushback plan of UK, wherein asylum seekers are sent back across the English Channel to France. And the media has called it shame on the UN and UK. France has said the Channel crossing pushback is against international law. Britain and France have been in locked dispute over the Channel crossing, and the Home Office has said that she would withhold money, 54 million or whatever, in funding which she had pledged to Paris if they cooperated with her pushback policy. But the Interior Minister of France has said that France would not accept violating international maritime law.
Agatha, I am very sorry to interrupt you. I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah,
and I know that
sorry.
we want to hear from Parissa as well, and some time for break.
Can I just give 5 minutes to sort of, I'm nearly finished. Okay. So, and there have been lots of objections to the immigration plan by the various organizations that support refugees. And if you want to know more about that, if you let me, you can send me an email and I will give you more information. There are several charities who come in to bridge the gap. These are just a few and they will be in the internet. And our own organization, we give sort of like a holistic approach to supporting refugees. So if there are lots of things you can do, everyone can contribute to the inclusion and implementation of the New Scores strategy and supporting refugees. So I've given a list here, few list of charities that support refugees, and the internet, if you log on the internet, there are many of these. So thank you very much for interesting. Yeah, sorry I had to go through so briefly, but there is just so much to talk about. And I'll give my email address if anybody wanted to know more. Okay, Callum, over to you, please. Can I introduce Parisa? Just a few things to say about Parisa when you are ready.
Go for it, Parisa. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, hello.
Can I introduce Parisa? I just introduced Parisa very briefly. If I can, let me just close my share. If I exit my share, okay. Parisa came to the UK in 2014, and she studied and got her master's in finance and management from Strathclyde University, and currently works as finance assistant for RST. Thank you, Parisa, for being with us today.
Hello, everyone. First of all, can I ask if you can hear me properly?
Perfectly, thank you.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I've got just 10 minutes and I've got like a 1 billion topic I could cover. So I'm trying to just like do my best to cover as much as I could. So I moved to Glasgow in 2014 with my family. And since when I moved here, I started learning English. Just imagine you want to go just for a trip. I don't know, just having some fun with your family, going for a restaurant. For each one of them, you normally search, you Google it, you ask family, friends, where's the best to go, and where can I find a really good place to have fun with my family or something like that. Or even if you want to go just outside of Glasgow, you normally go Google it and check what you can do. But when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees, they sleep at night and they think that they're going to have a coffee with their families in the morning. And they open their eyes and they're in the middle of nowhere, in, I don't know, in the journey of God knows what it is. And they find themselves in some countries that they don't even know where it is. And I'm pretty sure that you know about their journeys. So if anyone lives for 50, 60, 70 years or more, and that journey is just 1 month. And you can see all the social media, BBC, everywhere, how they talk about that 1 month or 2 months, which is crazy because it's just danger of their physical body. It's like they can drown in the ocean, they can die under a lorry, they can just, anything could happen to them and their beloved family. I mean, their family, the kids. And I'm pretty sure each one of us saw the kid who, 16 years old kid who just was on the, one of those airplane, US airplane and going up, and then I don't want to talk about that journey because all of us seen that journey before. What's really important is when they get somewhere, they claim asylum and they ask for help, and all they get is their the minimum. I mean, the minimum, and the government has started just like bolding that we are giving people 500 tents. Agata, do you mind to ask you if you can just share the your slide one more time, because in one of them you actually shared Maslow hierarchy of needs. I'm pretty sure every one of us heard that like too many times before. That shows like me as a person, what I want to achieve in my life is like physiological needs, which is food, sleep, shelter comes first, and then safety needs, and after that belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And when it comes to asylum seekers, all they get is food and shelter, nothing else. I don't want to just talk about that too, I spend too much time on that, because like each one of us know what's going on with asylum seekers. Asylum seekers don't have right to work. They do not have right to study as a full-time student unless they get a fund, which is like, okay, 5 people in 1 year, which is mostly like a joke to them. And if even they want to do some stuff, there are billions of barriers for them. I've been there. I lived with 35 to 37 pounds a week, which was like, I don't even know what to say. It's not even enough to get a pair of shoes or going for cinema. Being asylum seekers, apart from all the physical problems you're going to face, which is obviously because of like not having good food or not having any mental support, anything you can go and have fun with. The problem is mental health problem. There is nothing for that here in Glasgow. There are just like, if you go to GP and you say, okay, I'm depressed, they say, okay, there are lots of consultation here, but they're all in English. And yesterday you were in your bed in your country, and today, how do they expect you to speak English? So these are the stuff that happen to asylum seekers. And then they move to being refugee. Refugees, they do have right to work, they do have right to study, but they don't have money. I mean, for years and years, you didn't give them any rights. You didn't give them proper education. You didn't let them to study properly. If you want to learn English here, you have to stay like in a waiting list of years and years and years. I used to work as a caseworker, and I had one of the cases was like a lady with 3 kids, and she came to me and said that, is there anything I can get a backpack for my kid? She said, I'm not going to go to school with the same backpack as last 2 or 3 years. I started crying. At the time, I was asylum seeker as well, but I started crying after that. And I was talking to a manager and said, can I give my own backpack to her? And she was like, no, you're not allowed to do that. But I don't know how many emails I sent in that day just to find a backpack for the kid. Everywhere you could imagine. And thanks God, Selina Hell's one of the loveliest one I know here in Glasgow, a refugee. She sent us lots of stuff, and I passed it to a client. And that was my last client, because I resigned after that. I couldn't mentally handle stuff like that. So I moved to finance. So I went to college. I studied a lot. You cannot imagine how much I studied in the last few years. For learning English, I had to sacrifice loads of stuff. I had to leave like 6 a.m. it was like 6:45 or 7:45 a.m. in the morning just to get a bus, and then change another bus to get to college. And then as soon as I finished, I had to go for a voluntary, not just 1, 2 voluntary position I had to go for that, because I couldn't imagine myself to stay at home and doing nothing. And just, I didn't want to accept that, after 25, 26 years of like happy life, now I'm here, labeled as asylum seekers, because labeling people is crazy. They're not calling us, just like when you say that, it's like they don't say that, we have a client, they don't label us. If it comes to media, if it's Muslim, there's like there is a Muslim serial killer. But if it comes to just normal person, you're like, there's a man killed someone else. Media is always like that. A friend of mine was studying in London School of Economic a few years ago, and she asked me if it's better to do for the dissertation, do something like effect of media on asylum seekers' health. And I was like, sorry, there is none, because they don't understand English. But when they become refugee, when they get the right to work, when they get a right to study, they know what's going on. If you want to do for effect of media on refugees, go on. But on asylum seekers, I don't think so. Because I know it's bad. I mean, when you're just like labeling people, when stuff like that comes to your life, I mean, it affects your mental health so bad. Anyway, I did my management dissertation on gender inequality. And just imagine, I'm coming from like a refugee background, and gender inequality. When I saw stuff and gender inequality in the UK, and I mean, like, oh my God, this is not actually better. This is like worst. I had one of the subjects I had last year during studying in business at school, Strathclyde, was CEO challenges. And first sentence the professor said was like, "Hey guys, did you know that from the best 100 companies in the world, from 100 CEOs, I don't remember, 95, 96, 98, something like that, are men?" And I was like, do you want me to leave? If there is no chance, do you want me to leave? So I'm woman, I am asylum seeker / refugee, I'm not white, and my name is not British name as well. Do you want me to leave? I mean, because I'm a mistake. I have to, spend lots of time to study here. I have to just go through all the CEO's challenges. But if there is no chance, I better just like, I know, yeah, there's always a part here, going in offices and working, I don't know, cashier stuff, they're always there for asylum seekers, refugees. There are always a security jobs for them. So if you want me to, if you looking at us like that, if you're just like labeling is like the easiest things you can do, I can just leave right now. So mental health problem is the biggest things we're facing in every single step. And I don't know, when people comes and says, we are giving like asylum seekers £500 million for shelter, we just laugh. I mean, if you give us just permission to work, we can just pay. We don't need your money. I mean, when I got, everyone says, okay, asylum seekers, refugees going straight to job center. But when I got my right to work, I was full-time student. I got SAS, which is loan. I have to return it back to government later. And as soon as, my college wasn't finished yet, which I got 2 jobs in one day. I was still a student. The first year I got my right to work, and I got 2 jobs in one day because I didn't want to be like what you're labeling us. And it is important to tell people that we can do stuff. Just look at us like others. If you're not labeling us, if you just like not calling us, we're just giving like asylum seekers 500 million. We don't need that. I mean, we need just support, which is like mentally support. We just want you to look at us like other people. It was a couple of months ago, one of the workshop at work, at RSD, and the guy said that, if your CV and someone called Alan Brown goes like shortlisted for CEO, I'm sorry, you're not the one who get the job. And I was talking to my mom like a couple of weeks ago, and I said to my mom, I don't care. Who my husband is going to be or who I'm going to have a kid with. But my kid is going to have like the English first name and surname, because that's the only thing I can do for my kids. Because I can't say, okay, Muhammad, and then, sorry, you're not going to get a job.
Carissa, thank you, because that's very powerful testimony. Thank you very much for sharing that with us today, and thank you also to Agatha for speaking us through the reality that faces refugees arriving here in Scotland. Unfortunately, time has moved on this afternoon, and regrettably, we don't have time at the moment to move into our breakout rooms. However, what I'd invite you to do is to take some time to consider the questions that we were going to discuss in our breakout rooms. And perhaps you could, when we get an opportunity to circulate by email the recording from today, you could take some time to reply to us and share with us what struck you from this session, what's already being done to target the things that we've spoken about today, but what more we can do both as individuals and in our parish communities. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite the Vicar Episcopal for Caritas, Justice and Peace in the Archdiocese for St Andrews in Edinburgh, Father Basil Clark, to lead us in prayer. Father Basil. And you should see the option to unmute, Father.
Is that better?
We have you.
First of all, then, can I just thank you, Callum, for hosting today and for all the work you've done, for our principal speakers, to Mike and Agatha, also to Anthony and to Parisa, and to all who participated in today and organised it. I want to do two things very briefly. Once, we will do an affirmation of faith together to remind ourselves that we are committed to change ourselves, and committed to change our community of faith as we seek conversion in the world, and then to finish with a prayer for our earth from Laudato Si. And if Callum, you're able to put that, marvellous. I'd ask you to join in with me as you can. Obviously muted, it will only be my voice you'll hear. An affirmation of faith. We are a community of faith. We share a vision of God, a God whose spirit is love, accessible to all, yet beyond all. The source of all being, the way leading to wholeness, the spirit which pervades everything. We search for the meaning of God and our own experience, revealed in these sacred stories which have been passed down to us. We tell them again and again. Of God, the Creator, the Almighty, who made everything that is and saw that it was good. Of Jesus of Nazareth, who in history lived among us, healed the afflicted, taught, suffered, and died. He forgave those who crucified him in the mystery of the resurrection. He continues to live more profoundly through the ages. The incarnation of love, the Christ, to whom his disciples have responded, my Lord and my God. He shows us the way which leads to the reconciliation of all things, saying, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. It is the way of love, compassion, justice, forgiveness, and peace. Of the Spirit, the breath, the wind of God, the giver of life, the holy wisdom, who inspires the people of God to cry out for justice for the powerless and oppressed, to see the presence of God in every created thing, and to respond with love. Of the communion of saints, all the people of God, living, dead, and yet to be born, who are empowered to recognize that they are, and always have been, brothers and sisters, one family in God. We are reborn in the Spirit, followers of that way shown by Jesus, to love God with our whole being, to love our neighbours as ourselves, to treat others as we would have them treat us, to strive for justice and peace, to have respect and compassion for every person and for the whole of creation, to forgive those who do us harm, and to love one another as Christ has loved us. We journey together on this way. Together, reconciliation, towards reconciliation with the whole creation. We break bread together and pray together. We reach out to one another for strength beyond our own. This is our community. This is our faith. A prayer for the earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor of the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
Thank you very much, Basil, for closing our session today in prayer. And as Basil has already said, thank you very much to Mike, to Agatha, to Parisa, as well as to Anthony, to Angela, to John and Kath, who've led us in prayer today. And thank you to each and every one of you for joining us as we reflect in the season of creation on the human face of the climate emergency that faces us. There's much for us to consider, there's much for us to think about. And what we'll do now is we will prepare to share this recording on the Archdiocesan YouTube channel. We will save the chat, which has your questions and reflections and thoughts from today. And we will invite Mike and Agatha to consider some of the questions that you've put and some of the suggestions that you've shared with us. And we will respond in some way through email with everyone who has registered. So thank you very much once again for joining us, and have a lovely evening. Good night.